The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the vast Colorado sky in violent shades of crimson that reminded Rosalie Newsom too much of her own blood spilled just hours before. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the torn fabric of her once pristine blue dress, now stained dark with dirt and worse. The year was 1876, and as the 22-year-old schoolteacher staggered along the lonely trail outside of Silverton, she wondered if she would live to see tomorrow. Pain lanced through her side with each labored step. The three men who had caught her alone on her way home from school had taken her money, her dignity, and nearly her life. They'd left her for dead in a shallow ravine, but somehow she'd managed to crawl out, driven by a fierce will to survive that surprised even herself. Just a little. Further, she gasped, though she had no idea where further might lead her. The nearest homestead was miles away and night was falling fast. Behind her, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart seize with terror. They were coming back to finish what they'd started. With a whimper, Rosalie stumbled off the trail, desperate to hide, but her battered body betrayed her. She collapsed in a heap of torn fabric and broken spirit. "Whoa there, thunderclap," a deep voice called out, and the horses' hooves slowed to a stop. "What do we have here?" Rosalie curled into herself, making her body as small as possible. She heard the creak of leather as the rider dismounted, his boots crunching on the rocky ground as he approached. "Madam, are you hurt?" The voice was gentle now, cautious. She couldn't answer, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The shadow of the man fell across her and she flinched violently. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, crouching down but keeping his distance. "My name's Henry Dawson. I've got a ranch about 3 miles from here." Rosalie dared to lift her swollen eyes. The man before her was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the brim of his worn cowboy hat. The fading light caught in his golden-brown beard. "They'll come back," she managed to whisper through split lips. The cowboy's expression hardened as he took in her condition. "Who did this to you?" "3 men. "Don't know them," she rasped, her throat raw from screaming. "Please, help me." Without hesitation, Henry shrugged off his coat and gently draped it over her shoulders. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe, but I need to move you. Is that all right?" Rosalie nodded weakly, and he carefully lifted her into his arms. She cried out in pain despite his gentleness. "I'm sorry," he murmured, carrying her to his horse. "My ranch is closest. I've got some medical supplies there, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, is pretty skilled with doctoring." With surprising tenderness for hands so calloused, he helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His solid presence at her back should have terrified her after what she'd endured, but instead, she felt the first glimmer of hope. His arms formed a protective cage around her as he reached for the reins, careful not to press against her injuries. "Just lean back if you need to," he said softly near her ear. "I won't let you fall." The ride to Henry's ranch was agony for Rosalie. Each jolt sent fresh waves of pain through her battered body, but she bit her lip to keep from crying out. The countryside passed in a blur as consciousness faded in and out. At some point, she must have leaned back against his chest, because she woke to find his arm firmly supporting her. "Almost there," he assured her as a cluster of buildings appeared on the horizon. "That's my place. Dawson Ranch." Even through her pain-hazed vision, Rosalie could see it was substantial, a main house built of sturdy logs with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and a large barn. As they approached, a lamp flickered to life in one of the windows. "Mrs. Abernathy must have seen us coming," Henry said. "She's always keeping watch." A plump woman in her 60s burst through the front door as they rode into the yard. Her eyes widened at the sight of Rosalie. "Good heavens, Henry, what's happened?" "Found her on the trail. She's been attacked. We need to get her inside and tended to right away." The dismount was excruciating, but Henry was as gentle as possible as he lifted Rosalie from the saddle. Mrs. Abernathy hurried ahead to prepare a room while Henry carried her into the house. The interior was surprisingly warm and well-furnished for a bachelor rancher. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, and polished wooden furniture gleamed in the lamplight. But Rosalie had little time to observe her surroundings before Henry carried her into a small bedroom off the main living area. "This is our guest room," he explained, laying her carefully on the bed. "You'll be safe here." Mrs. Abernathy shooed him from the room. "Out with you now. I need to see to the poor girl's injuries." Once alone with the housekeeper, Rosalie felt the last of her strength give way. Tears streamed down her face as the older woman helped her out of her ruined clothes and into a clean nightgown. "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Abernathy murmured as she catalogued Rosalie's injuries. "Who did this to you?" "I don't know," Rosalie whispered. "They wore bandanas over their faces." The next hour passed in a haze of pain as Mrs. Abernathy cleaned and bandaged her wounds. 2 ribs were likely cracked, her left wrist was sprained, and bruises covered much of her body. The worst was a deep cut along her hairline that had bled profusely but looked worse than it was. "You're lucky, all things considered," Mrs. Abernathy said as she finished. "Nothing that won't heal with time and rest. I've mixed you something for the pain." Rosalie accepted the bitter-tasting liquid and soon felt the edges of her pain beginning to dull. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard the low murmur of voices outside her door. "How is she?" Henry's deep voice asked. "She'll recover physically," Mrs. Abernathy replied. "The rest will take time. I'll ride into town first thing in the morning, let the sheriff know." "And what then, Henry? You planning to bring her back to town after? The poor thing's terrified." There was a long pause. "She can stay here as long as she needs. We've got the room." Rosalie's last thought before sleep claimed her was that perhaps she truly was safe, at least for now. Morning came with golden light streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, Rosalie felt nothing but confusion until the pain in her body reminded her of yesterday's events. She tried to sit up but fell back with a gasp. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Abernathy's entrance. "Ah, you're awake. How are you feeling this morning, dear?" "Like I've been trampled by cattle," Rosalie admitted. The housekeeper helped her sit up and brought her a tray with tea and porridge. "Mr. Dawson rode into town at first light to talk to the sheriff. He wanted me to tell you not to worry, that you're welcome to stay here until you're well." "That's very kind of him, but I can't impose." "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted. "This big house could use a woman's touch besides my old hands. Henry's been rattling around here alone since his father passed 3 years ago. You've been with the family a long time." "Since Henry was knee-high to a grasshopper. His mother died when he was just 10 and his father hired me to keep house. Been here ever since." She poured more tea. "Now, when you're feeling up to it, we should talk about what happened. Sheriff will want details." Rosalie's hands trembled around her teacup. "I don't know if I can. In your own time, dear. No rush." It was mid-afternoon when Henry returned. Rosalie had managed to get out of bed with Mrs. Abernathy's help and was sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in a quilt, when he entered the room. Without his hat, she could see him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps no more than 30, with kind eyes the color of whiskey and a face tanned and weathered from outdoor life. "Miss Newsom," he said, removing his hat. "It's good to see you up, Mr. Dawson," she acknowledged. "Thank you for everything you've done." He shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff Wilson's forming a posse to look for the men who attacked you. He'd like to speak with you when you're able." Fear clutched at her heart. "Did you tell him where I am?" "I did, but I also told him you need time to recover." "He understands." Henry stepped closer, then seemed to think better of it when she tensed. "Miss Newsom, I want you to know that you're safe here for as long as you need." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. "You don't know me." He looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Because it's the right thing to do. My father raised me to believe that we have a duty to help those in need." A small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "Besides, Mrs. Abernathy would have my hide if I suggested otherwise." Despite everything, Rosalie found herself returning his smile, though it hurt her split lip. "She is rather formidable." "That she is. Now, is there anyone we should notify about what's happened? Family?" Rosalie shook her head. My parents died in a fever epidemic 2 years ago. I came west to teach school. No husband or sweetheart? No, Henry nodded. Well, you just focus on getting better. My home is your home for as long as you need it. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Rosalie slept much of the time, her body demanding rest to heal. When awake, she would sit by the window or on the porch if the weather was fine, watching the activities of the ranch. Henry kept his distance, seeming to understand her wariness around men, but he always greeted her with a kind word and inquired after her comfort. A week after her arrival, Sheriff Wilson came to take her statement. Henry insisted on being present, standing silent support in the corner of the room as she recounted the attack. The sheriff was respectful and professional, but the telling left Rosalie shaking and exhausted. "We'll find them, Miss Newsom," the sheriff promised as he prepared to leave. "Dawson here has offered a substantial reward for information." Rosalie looked at Henry in surprise, but he avoided her gaze, studying his hat brim as if it contained some fascinating secret. After the sheriff departed, she confronted him. "You offered a reward. Why would you do that?" He finally met her eyes. "Because what happened to you shouldn't go unpunished." "But it must have cost. I can afford it," he said simply. "The ranch does well." Something shifted between them that day. Rosalie began to see Henry not just as her rescuer, but as a man with his own story. She started joining him and Mrs. Abernathy for meals, learning about the ranch and the surrounding area. Henry, she discovered, was well-read and thoughtful, with a dry wit that occasionally surprised laughter from her. 2 weeks after her arrival, Mrs. Abernathy announced that Rosalie's clothes were beyond salvation. "I've taken the liberty of ordering some fabric from town. We can make you new dresses." "I couldn't possibly accept already done," Henry interrupted, not looking up from his coffee. "Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better." Rosalie bit her lip. "I don't know how I'll ever repay all this kindness." "You don't need to," he said, finally meeting her gaze across the breakfast table. "Some things aren't about debts and payments." As her strength returned, Rosalie began helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, partly to repay the kindness shown to her and partly to keep her mind occupied. The physical activity helped her regain her strength, though she still startled at sudden noises and couldn't bear to be alone outside the house. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Rosalie ventured onto the porch after dinner. The sunset painted the mountains in gold and purple, and the air was sweet with spring blossoms. She was so absorbed in the view that she didn't hear Henry approach until he spoke. "Beautiful evening." She flinched violently, nearly losing her balance. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, keeping his distance. "I didn't mean to startle you." "It's all right," she assured him, though her heart was racing. "I was lost in thought." He hesitated, then asked, "May I join you?" She nodded, and he settled into a chair several feet away, respecting her need for space. They sat in companionable silence watching the sunset. "I used to love this time of day," she said softly. "Now it reminds me of that evening." Henry turned to look at her, his expression gentle. "Maybe we can make new memories for this time of day." "How?" "Well, for starters, I could tell you about the time I tried to teach my bull Hercules to pull a cart and ended up being dragged through Mrs. Abernathy's vegetable garden." Despite herself, Rosalie laughed. "You didn't." "I absolutely did. I was 16 and thought I knew everything." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Mrs. Abernathy didn't speak to me for a week." For the next hour, Henry shared stories of his life on the ranch, each more entertaining than the last. By the time darkness had fully fallen, Rosalie had laughed more than she had in weeks. "Thank you," she said as they prepared to go inside. "That was healing." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're stronger than you know, Rosalie Newsom." It became their ritual evenings on the porch, trading stories as the sun set. Henry never pressed her to talk about the attack or her fears, but his steady presence and unwavering respect began to rebuild her sense of safety. He was unlike any man she'd known before, gentle despite his size and strength, thoughtful in his words and actions. A month after her arrival, Sheriff Wilson returned with news. They'd captured 2 of the men responsible for the attack. They'd been terrorizing settlements throughout the territory and were wanted for multiple robberies and assaults. "Would you be willing to identify them?" the sheriff asked. "We're holding them in the town jail." Fear gripped Rosalie, but she straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I'll do it." Henry immediately offered to accompany her. "I'll be with you the whole time." The next day, they rode into Silverton together. Rosalie wore one of her newly made dresses, a simple blue calico that Mrs. Abernathy had helped her sew. Henry stayed close as they approached the jail, his presence a comfort in the face of her mounting anxiety. "You don't have to do this," he reminded her as they stood outside the jailhouse. "No one would think less of you." "I would think less of me," she said firmly. "I need to do this." The identification was brief but harrowing. The men were brought out one at a time, and Rosalie confirmed that they were 2 of her attackers. They sneered and made crude remarks until Henry stepped forward, his normally gentle demeanor replaced by cold fury. The sheriff quickly returned the prisoners to their cells. "Thank you, Miss Newsom," Sheriff Wilson said. "Your testimony will ensure they hang. We're still looking for the 3rd man." Outside, Rosalie's composure finally broke. She trembled uncontrollably, and Henry guided her to a quiet spot behind the jailhouse where she could collect herself. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You faced them." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's facing that fear anyway." He offered her his handkerchief. "Are you up for the ride home, or would you like to rest a while?" The way he said "home" made her heart catch. Over the past month, the Dawson ranch had indeed begun to feel like home in a way she hadn't experienced since her parents died. "I'd like to go home," she said softly. The ride back was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the ranch, Henry finally broke the silence. "Rosalie, I've been meaning to ask you something." Her pulse quickened. "Yes." "The school board sent word that they're looking to fill your position permanently if you don't return soon. I told them you needed more time to recover, but they're pressing for an answer." "Oh." She hadn't thought much about her teaching position lately. "I suppose I should give them an answer." "What do you want to do?" It was a simple question, but it struck her that few people in her life had ever asked what she wanted. "I'm not sure I'm ready to live alone in town again," she admitted. "The thought of walking home alone each evening." "You could stay here and still teach," Henry suggested. "I could drive you to and from the school." "That's very kind, but it would be such an imposition." "It wouldn't." He slowed his horse, turning to face her. "Rosalie, having you at the ranch these past weeks, it's been good. The house feels more alive." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "Henry, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like you to stay, not just until you're fully recovered, but longer." He looked away, suddenly hesitant. "I enjoy your company." Warmth bloomed in her chest. "I enjoy yours too." "Then say you'll stay, at least for a while longer." She nodded, unable to deny the rightness of his request. "All right, I'll stay." Summer arrived, bringing long days of sunshine and warmth. Rosalie returned to teaching, with Henry faithfully transporting her to and from the schoolhouse each day. The townspeople whispered about their arrangement, but Rosalie found she cared little for gossip. For the first time in her life, she felt truly secure. Her nightmares gradually became less frequent, though they never disappeared entirely. On the nights when she woke gasping and terrified, she would light a lamp and sit on the porch, where Henry would inevitably find her. He never questioned or pressed. He simply sat with her until the fear subsided. One such night in late July, as they sat watching the stars, Henry reached across the space between their chairs and offered his hand. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact since bringing her to the ranch. Rosalie hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle. "I never told you why I was riding that trail the evening I found you," he said quietly. "I assumed you were returning from town." He shook his head. I'd been at the far pasture all day. I usually take the north trail back, but something told me to take the river road instead. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. I've thought about that a lot. What if I hadn't listened to that feeling? Rosalie shivered despite the warm night. I don't think I would have survived the night. I believe some things are meant to be, Rosalie. I was meant to find you that day. Their eyes met in the soft lamplight, and something unspoken passed between them. When he released her hand minutes later, Rosalie felt the loss keenly. As summer waned, Sheriff Wilson brought news that the third attacker had been captured in Denver. He would be brought back to stand trial alongside the others. The trial was set for September and Rosalie would need to testify. "I'll be there with you," Henry promised, and she believed him. In the month since the attack, he had never once failed to keep his word to her. The night before they were to travel to Denver for the trial, Rosalie found Henry in the barn, grooming his horse. She stood in the doorway watching him for a moment, struck by how comfortable she felt in his presence now. "Henry," he turned, a smile lighting his face when he saw her. "Evening, Rosalie. Everything all right? I wanted to thank you," she said, stepping into the barn, "for everything. Not just saving my life that day, but for helping me reclaim it afterward." He put down the brush and faced her fully. "You did the hard work yourself." "No, I couldn't have done it without you." She moved closer. "You stayed beside me when most men would have walked away. You never pushed or demanded. You just waited. Some things are worth waiting for." His voice was soft, his eyes never leaving hers. Rosalie closed the distance between them and, gathering her courage, placed her hand on his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palm. "I'm not afraid anymore, Henry, not when I'm with you." His hand covered hers, warm and strong. "Rosalie, I love you," she said simply, the words feeling right as they left her lips. "I don't know when it happened, but I do." For a moment he stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, with infinite gentleness, he cupped her face in his hands and leaned down until their foreheads touched. "I've loved you since I watched you face those men in the jailhouse," he whispered. "You're the bravest, strongest woman I've ever known." His lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. For the first time since the attack, Rosalie felt truly whole again, not just safe, but cherished. The trial in Denver was grueling, but with Henry by her side, Rosalie faced her attackers with unflinching courage. Her testimony was clear and damning, and all three men were sentenced to hang for their crimes. On the train ride home, Henry took her hand and said, "I have something to ask you." Her heart skipped. "Yes. When we get back, I'd like to speak with Reverend Thomas about publishing the banns." His eyes were earnest as they searched hers. "Will you marry me, Rosalie?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." They were married on a crisp October day with the aspen trees gleaming gold against the blue Colorado sky. Mrs. Abernathy wept openly as Rosalie walked down the aisle in a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself. The entire town turned out for the wedding, moved by the story of how they had found each other. After the ceremony, as they greeted their well-wishers, Sheriff Wilson approached with news. "Thought you'd want to know those men were hanged yesterday in Denver. It's over now, truly over." Rosalie looked up at her new husband, his face alight with love for her. "It's not over," she said softly. "It's just beginning." That night, as they stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, Henry wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him without fear. "Are you happy?" he murmured against her hair. Rosalie turned in his embrace to face him. "I never thought I could feel this way again, safe, whole, loved. You gave me back my life, Henry Dawson." "No," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You took it back yourself. I just had the privilege of watching you do it." As they stood together under the vast canopy of stars, Rosalie knew with absolute certainty that while some wounds might leave scars, they had also made her stronger. And in Henry's love, she had found not just safety, but a home for her heart. 5 years later, the Dawson Ranch had prospered and grown. Henry and Rosalie now had twin 3-year-old daughters with their father's golden brown hair and their mother's resilient spirit. Rosalie still taught at the schoolhouse 3 days a week, with Henry faithfully driving her back and forth, often with their daughters chattering in the back of the wagon. On the anniversary of the day Henry had found her on that lonely trail, Rosalie always made a special dinner. This year, as they sat together on the porch afterward watching their daughters play in the yard, Henry took her hand. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if I'd taken the North Trail that day?" he asked. Rosalie shook her head. "No." "Like you said then, some things are meant to be." She squeezed his hand. "I believe we would have found each other somehow." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Either way, I'm grateful for every day I've had with you. Even when I was broken and afraid, especially then," he said softly. "Because that's when I saw your true strength." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in the same crimson hues as the day they first met, Rosalie leaned against her husband's shoulder. What had once been a reminder of the worst day of her life had transformed into something beautiful, a symbol of beginnings rather than endings. In the golden light of sunset, surrounded by the family they had built together, Rosalie knew that the greatest act of courage had not been surviving the attack or facing her attackers at trial. It had been opening her heart again, believing in the possibility of love and safety when all evidence suggested otherwise, and Henry, her steadfast cowboy, had been patient enough to wait until she was ready to take that leap of faith. "I love you," she whispered. His arm tightened around her shoulders. "And I love you, always will." In the vast expanse of the Colorado Territory, where danger and beauty existed side by side, they had carved out their own sanctuary, not a place where harm could never reach them, but a place where they faced whatever came together, stronger for having weathered the worst and found the best in each other.